Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Timothy here with Mana Rocks, and we will go ahead and continue our review of Ikoria spoilers today, going through all of the cards that get spoiled, at least on Mythic Spoiler. I'm not jumping around to a bunch of different websites to keep up with the most recent spoiler, but we'll just stick to Mythic Spoiler. They're pretty much on it as far as new reprints, or rather new spoilers go. And in this video, we will be looking at the main set, so Ikoria boxes, Ikoria boosters, Ikoria draft. We are not looking at the commander product, even though we will be doing that in a separate video, as we have been for the past couple days. And we won't really be talking about reprints if they come up, unless they're relevant for limited or constructed. I guess we'll talk about reprints that are in the main set, right? It's reprints in the commander decks that I don't particularly care to spend time talking about, because either you don't know what it does, or you do know what it does, and if you do know what it does, you're kind of wasting your time to talk about a reprint, right? Unless it's a really significant reprint. But anyway, Ikoria is the name of the game here. We've seen a lot of cool stuff. At this point, we are kind of winding down to a lot of the commons, uncommons, and kind of filler cards are going to start getting in there. Usually there's one big batch to kind of round out the set, and it usually involves, or includes one, like, really good rare or mythic that they just didn't spoil separately. Like Dream Trawler was like that, right? Dream Trawler was just in the last batch of like commons and uncommons, and they're like, how did they miss this card? But anyway, before we jump in and talk about our friend the Thieving Otter, feel free to subscribe below if this has made any difference in your day. If you're stuck at home and this has, added anything to your day personally, feel free to subscribe below. And if not, that's cool. Thanks for hanging out. Also, you can find us on Twitter at MTG_Manarocks. I don't really use the Twitter a lot, but that's because there's not a lot of followers on Twitter. So if you want to go find us on Twitter, that's where we are. And why don't we go ahead and jump in? So we're going to jump around a little bit on the website because there were, spoilers here and there between the Commander product over the weekend. But we're going to go ahead and start off with this little guy, the Thieving Otter. Everybody was really upset about Lutri, the companion, because it was rightfully banned in Commander before we got a chance to play it, and people are like, oh, the Elemental Otter. We don't get to play the Elemental Otter. But here you go. Here's an Otter. We actually saw another Elemental Otter yesterday, so get over it. Thieving Otter is 2 and a blue, 2/2, common Otter, and we've seen this card before. When it deals damage to an opponent, draw a card. So, what do they call that? Master Thief, Scroll Thief, something like that. It's a good card for decks that are able to continuously get it in, or decks that just have a ton of removal, right? If you are able to just get all of your opponent's blockers out of the way every turn, this is going to draw you into more action, more cards that can get more blockers out of the way, and you kind of get this little engine going where this just keeps getting in there, right? It's a 2/2 for 3 mana, which is not good stats. And this is a set where there are like 2 mana, 2 3s and stuff like that, and really big creatures and stuff like that going on. But imagine mutating onto this. You can mutate onto this with a creature that has flying, or a creature that has some other form of evasion. I can't remember if there's a mutate creature that's unblockable or anything like that. And you can mutate onto this just with better stats, and then the Thieving Otter's ability will be granted to whichever creature you put on top of it. So this is a nice base to have for a mutate creature. And we usually see it the other way around, right? You want to mutate the big creature on top. That's true here too, but this is a creature that specifically wants to be on the bottom so that you can give it a stat boost, but have the same ability, right? Like mutate a flyer onto this or something like that, and you just keep getting in. There's also the Dolphin. It was a 1/4 for 3 mana that said when it attacked, another creature is unblockable, and that is best friends with the Thieving Otter. So I do expect this to be a pretty key card for limited, right? Just finding a way to make sure it keeps getting in there is, a self regulated engine in limited. And I've said it for a bunch of cards in this set already, and maybe there's just a lot of draw power, but being able to have your own personal Howling Mine in a game of limited is basically a game plan in itself to win a game. Like, just outdrawing your opponent sometimes is enough, even if your cards might be lower quality. Having, twice as many cards as your opponent is pretty good to just outmuscle them, right? Anyway, next card up is a Bastion of Remembrance. It's 2 and a black for an uncommon enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you make a 1/1 human soldier token, sure. And whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So it's a Blood Artist effect. It is, I don't know, what's a Blood Artist that hits each opponent? Zulaport Cutthroat, right? There's so many of them now. Cruel Celebrant, Vindictive Vampire. There's like a million Blood Artists now. Sir Conrad. I can keep going, right? But it's in the form of an enchantment, so it's not as easy to remove, but it also doesn't attack or block itself, and it's not dying, so it won't trigger when it dies like a lot of these other cards do. It also only makes a single 1/1. There's no engine here, right? This doesn't say, like, when a creature dies, make a token. When a token dies, drain a life or something like that. So, as a standalone card, this doesn't really do what you want to do. 3 mana for a single 1/1 that dies and drains your opponent for 1, that's not going to cut it, right? You need to make sure this is triggering a bunch, and in order to do that, you need to have a bunch of tokens on board. Usually this sort of effect is relevant in Limited, right? Just the kind of like ping here, ping there, I gain a couple life. It adds up over the course of a game. Basically, anytime these cards are printed in a Limited set, they end up being relevant, even if the stat line's not great. Like Blood Artist, Zulaport Cutthroat, basically every card I just named. Vindictive Vampire is not even a good one. The 4 mana 2/3 with this ability. That's not a particularly great version of that card due to the stat line, but it still kind of just incidentally damages your opponent and gains you some life when your other creatures are dying. And it does that best when you are playing tokens. So Bastion of Remembrance is very clearly skewed towards humans when it comes to Limited. But it needs some work, right? You need to be drafting other token makers, or you just need to have a deck with tons and tons of creatures. But this as its own card is not quite enough. It needs support, and I don't know. I think I like it for Commander, for sure. You know, more Blood Artists, kind of my thing. I love me a Blood Artist, but Bastion of Remembrance, you need to add on to it a little bit when it comes to playing it Limited. Alright, we're going to skip ahead a little bit, skip all these Commander cards we talked about, and let's go ahead and grab this guy. Just the one random Ikoria spoiler that happened yesterday. Lava Brink Adventurer is 2 and a white for a, might be a she, I said guy, you know what I mean. It might be a female. Lava Brink Adventurer, 2 and a white for a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, choose odd or even, and it has protection from the chosen converted mana cost. So we had, what was that one in this current set, Theros Beyond Death? Haktos, is that it? The 6/1 where you randomly choose like 2, 3, or 4 and it has protection from all the other numbers. What an annoying card to play against in Limited, because either you roll a number where your opponent just has answers and it's like whatever, or you roll a number and it just wins the game because you just randomly rolled the number where they don't have an answer for it. This is a little different because in a game of Limited, which is where this is probably going to see, you know, the most relevance, you're going to have a neat, or not neat, but a reasonable distribution of even and odd costed cards in your deck. You're just going to, that's how Limited works. You're taught to build on a curve, so you'll have 2s, 3s, 4s, maybe a couple 5s and a 6 or something like that. So sometimes this will stone cold brick wall you because you just happen to have the wrong numbers in hand or on the battlefield. But it also means that there's a wider variety of answers to it than there was for like Haktos, right? Excuse me. Very unprofessional. So unprofessional. Go ahead and downvote video for coughing in the middle of it. Don't do that. Upvote for cough. But I think this card's cool. So it's 3 mana 3/3, which is already a good stat line. Although I think we've seen quite a few of those in this set. I believe there's just a ton of 3 mana 3/3s and 2 4s and 3 4s running around this set. The thing that really I love about this, can you imagine being the person who decides to go for it in Limited with one of the companions, and you're like, you know what, I'm going to build the deck that's all even costed cards. I'm just going to do the thing for the Kraken, right? And I'm going to have this Kraken as my companion, and then your opponent plays this and names even, and you have 0 answers to it. It's pretty crazy. Also, another thing to keep in mind with cards like this, which was true of Haktos as well, is that it protects it from your cards as well, and that means that you can't play an aura on it if it's the chosen mana cost, right? If you chose odds, you can't cast an odd costed aura on your own creature. And if you have like equipment laying around or something, you can't equip to this creature if the mana cost of that equipment is even or odd, whatever you chose, right? You cannot mutate, but that's because this is a human and you can't mutate onto humans in the first place. So just keep that in mind. I think they were smart to make this a human so that you couldn't mutate onto this thing that just randomly has protection from half your opponent's deck. Don't know if this will be a contender in Constructed. I don't know if humans is going to be a thing, but you know, this seems like a reasonable card for Limited. A strong rare, like a good solid card to start off with, but beatable, unlike Haktos in some situations where you might just get lucky with that card. Roll 4 and your opponent has no 4s. So we talked about all these commander cards yesterday. There were quite a few. We will pick up with the commander cards with Twin and Staff in a separate video, and then talk about those. Also this card, which I hate, doesn't need to exist, but it does. But we will go ahead and cover these next 12 cards separately, and if any more spoilers pop up by the time we get there, we'll cover those as well. But that's going to be our game plan for this video, is the next 12 cards, starting with De un Bocado, in one bite. I thought Bocado was mouth. I don't know other languages, so I'm just guessing here. But anyway, in one bite is a single white mana for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast it, tap untapped creature you control. It's an uncommon, should mention that, uncommon removal here. You have to tap an untapped creature you control to cast it, and the effect you get is exile target tapped creature, put a +1/+1 counter on the creature tapped to cast this spell. Okay, so this is extremely powerful removal for Limited, right? You know, 1 mana, exile a creature. That's the best you can ask for in Limited. Literally Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, you know, levels of removal. And on top of that, you get to grow one of your creatures, right? You get to put a +1/+1 counter on whichever creature you tap to pay the cost for this card. You can't cast this on an empty board. So, you know, even though this is extremely efficient, powerful removal, it's got, you know, quite a few downsides to it. First off, like I just said, you've got an empty board, or you've got a creature that you just can't tap because you need it to block. You know, too bad. You have to tap a creature in order to cast this. You can't just free cast it. And second, it only targets tapped creatures, right? So your target, the creature that you want to get rid of, has to be tapped. And we see this with removal sometimes, where it only targets tapped creatures, and sometimes it's dead in your hand. That creature has Vigilance. They have a way to untap it. That creature is not engaging in combat. It's just sitting back to block. It's going to be tough to get that creature off the board unless it's already attacked you, right? And this is a sorcery, so you usually have to take a hit off that creature as well before you get rid of it. If you're willing to do all that, and maybe if you have a way to tap a creature yourself, so that your opponent doesn't necessarily have to be attacking with that creature, then in one bite is going to be a good way of getting rid of it. Solid removal. You'll still play this, I believe. You might board it out against like a Vigilance deck or something like that, if that's a thing. But this is about as efficient as removal gets. It just has, you know, a couple caveats to it, which brings it down to like the mortal realm of removal. It's good removal, but it's not absolute busted like first pick removal. So in one bite, balanced, powerful removal for Limited. Next up, all right, we got to talk about this one. So Thwart the Enemy, Tuna Green for a common instant, prevent all damage that would be dealt this turn by creatures your opponents control. Okay, so that right there is that's what you need to make a fog playable. So we always preach, you know, everybody who does Limited podcasting, Limited videos, you know, anyone who drafts and posts their stuff online and gives information to the masses, they always preach how not to play a fog just being prevent all damage for the turn, right? Because the problem with a fog, and we can go into this in a whole separate video about why not to play fogs, but in layman's terms, the reason not to play a fog is because if you're in a position where a fog is good and preventing a bunch of damage to you, you're probably in the same kind of bad position the turn after, but you're just down a card. So it's more like delaying the inevitable instead of solving the problem. The difference here with a card like Thwart the Enemy is that it's a one-sided fog, so it only prevents your opponent's creatures from dealing damage, which means that you can still engage in combat, and you can do so in a way that's positive for you. You can maybe throw all of your creatures on top of one creature and block them and prevent all the damage your opponents are going to do, so you're not going to take any damage, your creatures are going to survive combat, but you might be able to pick off a creature, maybe if you're lucky pick off 2 or 3 creatures, that being the best case scenario, and just get out of that combat scot-free. It also means that if you attack into your opponent and, you know, they've got a combat trick or something like that that just completely, like, ruins your attack, you can use this to kind of negate your own attack, right? Now, I'm not advocating for playing a bunch of these, but I want to point out that this is playable. A one-sided fog is leaps and bounds better than a regular fog, because you're the one holding it. You have the information of when it's right to cast it, and you know how to do your blocks and stuff like that. It's great when you just go, like, block a couple things, your opponent goes for a pump spell on their unblocked creature, and you play thwart the enemy and take out an attacker, plus their pump spell really didn't do anything. That's a powerful effect. A couple of these I can think of from the past that were really good were usually uncommons. There was, like, Winds of Calcisma from Fate Reforged, I believe. There was Encircle and Fissure from Battle for Zendikar, or maybe Oath of the Gatewatch, I don't know. But anytime they've printed a one-sided fog, it has been playable, but I just want to temper that by saying don't go crazy and, you know, draft like 3 or 4 of these. You still, at most, probably want 1, and even then, it's a little situational. It's a card that's not going to help you get ahead if you're behind. It's just going to put you in a decent position for combat. Next up, Go for Blood. 1 in a red for a sorcery. Target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. Prey upon. Pretty used to that one. It is 2-sided fight, so your creature is going to get hit back, and it cycles for a single colorless mana. So nothing to, you know, nothing to complain about here, right? 2 mana Prey upon is still a Prey upon. If you're in red and this set has big beefy creatures, then this ought to be pretty good. Fits in the cycling deck because it cycles cheaply, as do all of the cyclers in this set. So, you know, it fits kind of a role of being a removal spell that if it's not castable, you can cycle it away. And that's kind of a problem with fight spells sometimes, is your creatures actually end up being smaller than your opponent's creatures, and your fight doesn't actually kill the creature you needed to kill, so you cycle this away and try to find some other action. I do like that this is in a set that is, you know, kind of based on giant creatures, which could be good or bad. It usually means that you're going to have really big creatures on board if you're playing this card, obviously, but it also means that your opponent is going to have big creatures as well. So you should be able to 1-for-1 this pretty often, but it has the same kind of problems that any other sorcery speed fight has, and that means that you can get blown out in response. So you just have to be careful about using your fights. And even 2 mana for a Prey upon is still a removal spell if you're in a position to make it work. So 2 mana fight spell with Cyclone seems like a solid addition to basically any red deck in this format, but really good for a specific Cyclone deck because it gives it a removal spell and a Cyclone enabler as well. Next up, Evasion Protocol. This is 1 in a blue for an uncommon enchantment. It says whenever you cycle a card, you may pay a colorless mana. If you do, exile target creature or artifact you control, and then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. So, a couple things here. First off, this is the second blue uncommon Cyclone payoff that I've seen in the set, which is really weird that there's 2 of them. This is kind of like a riff on Astral Slide, or what's the other one? Astral Drift, where you can blink cards for cycling. It does have a mana requirement on it. You do have to pay an additional mana, but most of the cycling cards are cheap enough that that's probably fine. What you really, really want to do this with is pair it with an Enter the Battlefield effect, which there are not a lot of in this set because most of those have been replaced by Mutate, which is kind of like a rift on Enter the Battlefield effects. So you're kind of looking elsewhere. If you can't find a good Enter the Battlefield effect, what you're looking for is using this as protection of some sort, right? Or a way to maybe bump an aura off of your creature, or do anything that you can typically do with blink in your own creature. You know, you can block with the creature and then cycle and trigger Evasion Protocol to blink your creature and then put it back in the battlefield, which means that it won't take combat damage, stuff like that, right? Same deal, if you're attacking and your attack goes bad somehow, you can blink your creature to have it come back in as like a pseudo vigilance ability. But one thing I want to mention here, and really importantly, is the way that this interacts with Mutate. how flicker effects work with mutate. Let's say you've got a creature on board and it's been mutated, let's just say twice, right? Just so this is a very clear example. So you've got 3 cards in this deck. You've got the top card, and then you've got 2 cards that are mutated underneath it. And then you use Evasion Protocol to blank it. What happens is you pick up all 3 cards and exile them, but when they come back into the battlefield, they're all separated again. So you'll have all 3 of those come back in separately as 3 separate creatures, which means that this can be used with Mutate as like kind of this crazy gang block scenario, or a way to kind of reset your Mutate stack for whatever reason you might want to do that, or save your creature from removal, right? Granted, most people will be smart enough to not aim a removal spell at one of your creatures while you have this on board and open mana and cards in hand, but it is still a thing to be wary of. I think it's kind of weird that they decided to put a blink effect in a set that has this complicated mutate ability, but I don't know. I mean, I don't think this one's quite as useful as the one that makes the 8/8 Octopus or Kraken or whatever, but it still seems like maybe it's worth taking a look back at the set and seeing if there's something to abuse with this. Because, like I said, there's not a lot of ETB effects, but if we can find at least 1 or 2 good ones, maybe even in the Cyclone deck, then it seems pretty good. I guess there is the there's the Lizard, the 5-mana 4/4 that enters the battlefield and exiles a card with Cycle in, and then you can play that until end of turn. That actually seems like a bit of a wombo combo with the Protocol, because you get to blink that out and then exile the card that you use to blink it. Although I guess that's just kind of wheel spinning, because you could have cast that card from your hand in the first place instead of cycling it to blink it to exile it to cast it. I don't know. Let's take a look back at that maybe in a separate video to see if there's something going on with this card, and we'll be on the lookout for enter the battlefield effects moving forward. Sorry, I don't read German, but Cunning Night Bonder is up next. It is blue-black hybrid mana, so 2 mana, any combination of blue or black. It's a 2/2, and it has flash, so 2 mana 2/2 flash is like a fine card if you ignore all other text. A bear is fine. 2 mana 2/2 is fine. I imagine this is a set where, you know, a 2 mana 2/2 is underwhelming unless you have ways to mutate onto it. Like I said in a previous video, this might be a set, contrary to what I just said, where the 2-drop is extremely important because you want to start mutating on turn 3 with your really powerful cards and start attacking for a bunch early and get your mutate triggers and stuff like that. So, kind of Nightbonder, I don't know if a bear is going to cut it or not, but typically speaking, a 2 mana 2/2 flash is not that much different than a 2 mana 2/2, right? Now this has kind of this weird archetypal text on it, and I don't know if blue-black is like the flash archetype or something. I'll have to go again look back at the set and see if that's what blue-black is doing. But it says spells you cast with flash cost 1 less to cast and can't be countered, which is pretty sweet. That whole can't be countered thing, it comes up rarely, but it comes up, so it's, you know, an extra bonus. But I recall there being a decent number of cards with flash. A lot of the sharks and stuff had flash. So maybe there's an archetype here. Maybe blue-black is the flash deck for limited, and I just didn't really catch on to that. But if it is, then this is a pretty good payoff, just because, you know, it makes your spells cost 1 less, and this is a fine card as well. It's not too unsightly to think of a scenario where you have this plus another flash creature in your hand on like 5 mana, and you go cast this plus cast that cheaper flash creature on the same turn, and you just like surprise your opponent out of nowhere. So pretty cool card. It is worth noting when it comes to commander or something like that, this doesn't interact favorably with cards like Leyline of Anticipation or Vidalcan Orrery, because those cards don't actually give the cards in your hand flash, so they wouldn't be reduced by this card. They are worded, I believe they say you may cast cards as though they had flash, which is some, you know, pandering text to make it work, but also means that it doesn't actually really have flash, so it doesn't reduce the cost here. But that's just kind of a minor hit there. I guess Leyline of Anticipation is in standard, so it's worth possibly noting that. Next up, this is a card that I think is going to be extremely important, and we'll talk about why, but let's read it first. Sea Dasher Octopus is 1 blue for a 2/2 rare octopus. It has flash. There you go, blue-black flash, I guess. It says, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. And the reason that I think this card is going to make some sort of waves, whether, you know, as a limited all-star or maybe even a constructed card, is because the mutate cost is 1 and a blue. And I've been saying this, I think, throughout the whole series, that I'm keeping my eye out for a good creature that has a mutate cost for just like 1 or 2 mana. And I want to say, maybe there have been others, but I want to say this is the first one that we've seen that mutates for just 2 mana. And what that means is you can go in constructed, even in limited, and this is kind of like the wombo combo in limited, but in constructed you can go 1 drop and then mutate this on turn 2, right? And just have this engine going from the very beginning, and then possibly mutate onto that further, and then you have like this really like powerful engine going as early as like turn 2 or 3, right? And the card that I'm really thinking of here is the Mamba, the 1 mana black snake that says whenever this creature mutates, target creature gets -2/-2. So you play that on turn 1, your opponent plays their Edgewall Innkeeper or whatever, and then you mutate onto this, you kill their 1-drop, maybe even their 2-drop, and then you attack, draw a card, and you just get to keep going from there. And the fact that this has flash means that you can be a little bit safer about how you're going to play it out. You can attack. This is more limited. You can attack with a bunch of creatures into your opponent, maybe with the intentions of throwing one away, and then after they've made block, you can mutate this onto one of the unblocked creatures because it has flash, and start drawing cards that way. Also just very powerful to put on an unblockable creature or a flyer and turn it into like your own little sea otter. We just talked about the sea otter, and this is better than the sea otter. It's actually interesting because it's almost the same card, like a 3-mana 2/2 that draws a card when it deals combat damage, but this obviously has the upside of having flash and mutate, so it makes it that much better. And we were already talking about how we like the otter, but Sea Dash or Octopus, I think that 2-mana mutate cost is just like enough to push it over the top. And here's another 2-mana mutate cost. Lore Jaraxxus is 1 blue-red for a 2/3. It's an uncommon lizard beast. And the mutate cost again is 2 mana. It's 2 hybrid mana, so blue, red, or blue-red, however you want to pay that. And whenever this creature mutates, return target instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. And, excuse me, there's no restriction. They could have said like instant or sorcery with Cyclone or whatever, but they didn't. They just said, hey, you want to mutate this thing? Okay, get a spell back for it. You want to mutate it again? Get a spell back. And think about how out of control that can get. That means that if you have a solid removal spell in your graveyard, you maybe use it, kill a creature. Let's just say a burn spell. You burn your opponent with an instant or sorcery, or you kill one of their creatures, and then you mutate this onto something else. You get that burn spell back, you kill a creature. Maybe you get a draw spell back. It means that every time you mutate this, you're getting some sort of 2-for-1 off of it, right? Maybe not right away, but you're getting a kill spell back, you're getting a draw spell back, you're getting something relevant back from your graveyard. And this is a type of card where you don't need to have like a million instants or sorceries to make it work. You really only need a couple, because you can keep getting the same instant or sorcery back, assuming that that's something you want to keep casting, right? And clearly, this is in blue-red. The Jeskai deck, blue, red, and white, is where Cycling is kind of centered. So this is, you know, generic enough to be good in any blue-red deck, but very clearly focused on the Cycling cards, right? You cycle an instant or sorcery away, you use Lore Jaraxxus to get it back. This isn't as, like, rawly powerful as the Octopus we just saw, because that's just like, hey, get in there, draw a card, get in there, draw a card, get in there, draw a card. This is more like you need to keep mutating to draw a card, but whenever you draw a card, it's always going to be a relevant instant or sorcery. Also, this one is, despite being a 2-mana mutate creature, not something you're going to play on turn 2, right? Because you won't have an instant or sorcery in your graveyard by then. Especially if you played a 1-drop creature, you just can't get an instant or sorcery in your graveyard. So, despite having a cheap mutate cost, this is a late game play, mid to late game play, but enables the cheap mutate cost enables turns where you can play this plus cast a spell during the same turn. So, Lore Jaraxxus, pretty sweet. Again, I don't know that blue-red is really the spells matters archetype. It's more like a cycling archetype, but it has this kind of like sub-theme of instants and sorceries mattering, just because a lot of those are going to be cyclers. Moving on, we have Lightning Lion. This is Savai? Is that supposed to be Savannah? I don't know. Savai Thunder Lion. No, I guess it's probably Savai, because there it is in the text. Savai Thunder Lion, our Boros uncommon. It's red-white for a 3/2 uncommon Lion Elemental. That's pretty cool. Like Thunder Mufasa or something here. It says, whenever you cycle a card, you may pay 2 mana. If you do, Savai Thunder Lion deals 2 damage to target creature and you gain 2 life. Now, that's a cycling payoff right there. That might be the best cycling payoff we've seen in the set so far, like in the actual Ikoria set. You get to just, dome something for 2 anytime you cycle a card. Granted, you do have to pay mana for it, but, Lightning Rift is a pretty busted card. If you've ever played Vintage Masters and you've seen the cycling deck with Lightning Rift, that lets you just kind of throw around 2 damage anytime a card was cycled. This is a little more narrow, and it has a little bit more expensive of a cost, but the cycling cards are so cheap in this set that it's pretty easy to set this up where you cycle a card for 1, pay 2 mana, and you just shock something and gain 2 life, right? Even if this, I guess the wording matters here a lot. So the translation might be incorrect here. If this doesn't say up to 1 target creature, then you can't really use it, right? Because this would be the only target. If this is the only creature on board, I'm wondering if, I guess it doesn't hit a player, so you just wouldn't activate it, right? You guys see what I'm getting at here? If this is the only creature on board, then there's no reason to activate it because you aren't hitting any other creatures, and this can't hit your opponent. But it's not. It doesn't seem like it's a up to 1. Causes 2 points of damage to a creature. Yeah, I don't know enough to know what those words in between mean, but also and gain 2 points of life. This is you. And you gain 2 points of life. I don't know what elven means. Anyway, I'm trying to learn a language in the middle of this video, but whatever. Forget all that. It's also a 2 mana 3/2, which is just really good stats. And this has got to be a cat, right? Elemental cat. That felino has to be cat. I think it says elemental lion, but I'm pretty sure it's elemental cat. Anyway, this is a really powerful card. This, clearly, again, red-white is in that Jeskai sub-theme. It cares about cycling. The red-white deck is often going to be a cycling deck. And, I do see a deck coming together where you go cycle and payoff, cycle and payoff, cycle and payoff, and then you just go cycle, 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 and you just control the board that way. It's not even inconceivable to think about having this sitting on the board and then go cycle a card for 1, pay 2 to shock a 4 toughness creature, and then I have 6 mana, so do it again. Cycle for 1, pay 2 to shock another creature. So you deal 4 damage, and you gain 4 life. A very powerful card. Definitely a little bit of a build around, but if you end up in somehow a red-white deck that doesn't care about cycling that much, then, this is still a good card. 3 mana, 3/2. And then we've got a couple more here. I'm actually going to let's go left to right on these because they tell a story or something. These commons that just happen to have this thing going on for whatever reason. It's kind of cool, but it's a little weird too. Forbidden Friendship is 1 in a red for a sorcery. It's a common. It says create a 1/1 red dinosaur creature token with haste and a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So you get a 1/1 haste and a 1/1 human for 2 mana. So we're used to seeing cards like Dragon Fodder, Krenko's Command, stuff like that. Just, 2 mana to make 2 tokens. Sorcery speed is what red gets usually for those. It's a little bit annoying. It's fine because it's telling the story of the friendship between this human and this dinosaur. But it's a little annoying and limited where you make multiple tokens with the same card. Outlaw's Merriment being the most recent example of that. But also, if you ever played, Bestial Menace in a set where it makes a 3/3 elephant, a 2/2 wolf, and a 1/1 snake or something, it's come on. I guess this will be my 3/3, this will be my 2/2. You get the point here. And, there's enough humans that there will at least be a human token laying around on the table when you draft. But anyway, 2 mana to make 2 tokens, one of which has haste. One is a human as well. If you end up in, the Mardu deck that cares about humans. Although it looks like in Limited, that's really just black-white. I know the Commander deck is Mardu, but I haven't really seen any red human matter stuff when it comes to Limited here. So I don't know that actually will matter or not. But 2 tokens for two mana is fine, and there's not much else. We'll go ahead and read the flavor text because it's relevant. It says, "The two looked at each other and neither fled. I see," the soldier murmured. "We're both just fighting for survival out here, aren't we?" So the meeting of Dino and man, right? Of man and dinosaur, I guess. Next up in our harrowing story about this guy and this dinosaur is Capture Sphere, which is a reprint. Capture Sphere was in one of the Ravnica sets, or was it War of the Spark? I don't remember. I want to say it was in the first Ravnica set, Ravnica, or Guilds of Ravnica. Anyway, if you haven't played with the card, it's 3 and a blue. It's a common. It's common blue removal. It has flash. It enchants a creature, and when it comes into play, it taps that enchanted creature, and that creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. So it's pretty run-of-the-mill common blue removal, where it is going to take care of a threat, but it is going to do so in an awkward way, and it's going to do so for a pretty hefty cost. 4 mana to lock down a creature is a decent amount, especially if you're getting beat down by some big creature. But remember how important something like this can be for a set that has mutate. Mutate, often incentivizes you to put a lot of resources onto the same creature, or very often, a savvy player will mutate once onto a creature, and if you capture Sphere it, you basically take care of the entire problem all at once. It doesn't prevent them from mutating onto that creature further if they have good triggers there, but it does mean that you're not going to get beat down by this big conglomerate creature or something like that. It's fine. It does have flash, which I believe works with that 2-drop that we just saw, which makes it a little bit better. But, there are blink effects. There's probably naturalizes. There's stuff like that. We saw pacifism in this set already. Capture Sphere is like a worse pacifism, for sure. Flash is good. Tapping the creature down is good, but twice as much to cast as pacifism makes it, I think, a little bit worse, even if it does seem to, fit in this archetype. Oh, let's go back. We have to... Oh, wait, never mind. There's no flavor text. What? Okay, there's no flavor text. But I guess, they found each other. They're good friends. And then someone came along and threw a Pokeball at it and, tried to capture it. So the dude's like, "Look, man, I'll trade you my Wobbuffet for it." I don't know. I don't play Pokemon anymore. Wobbuffet? Is that... Whatever. Anyway, next up, we have another reprint. Catharsis Reunion is 1 in a red for a common sorcery, and you probably know this card. As an additional cost to cast it, discard 2 cards, and the effect is you draw 3 cards. So, not really anything to abuse with this here. I want to say this was in Ether Revolt. It might have been Kaladesh. No, it was actually, I think it was Kaladesh, and it was one of those cards in the set that you just never played, right? See, the thing with Torment and Voice is that you only have to really hold on to 1 land at some point, and you can cast it to dig later on. Catharsis Reunion asks you to discard 2 cards, which means that if you do top deck it later in the game, you've got to wait until you draw 2 cards you want to discard, and that's just not really worth it when there's no themes that really care about this. I guess it discards 3 cards, or it discards 2 cards, but the cycling cards in this set only care about you cycling. They don't care about cycling and discarding. So if you think back to Amonkhet with cards like Faith of the Devoted or Drake Haven, they said whenever you cycle or discard a card, do the thing. And I don't think any of the cycling payoffs in this set actually say that. They just say, hey, if you are cycling, do the thing, not if you're cycling or discarding. So it's not like Catharsis Reunion even works with those cards. Maybe there's something I'm missing here, but it seems like a pretty dorky reprint that's just here to tell this story. But anyway, the flavor text are stunning conclusion to the story of Dino and Man. The soldier had given up his wealth, his title, even his home, but he had no room for regret. At last, he had saved his friend. It's beautiful, really. All right, goodbye. Anyway, our last card here to talk about. Fronland Bela Dart. It's fun to say. They've done a lot of alliteration in this set. It's kind of cool. Also annoying. 2 green and a white for a 3/5 rare cat beast. Okay, 4 mana 3/5. I've got my eye on that with Vigilance. Look, I hate Vigilance. I think it's the dorkiest mechanic, but it serves a role. Okay, I'm just knocking it for being boring when it comes to commander cards, but in Limited, Vigilance serves a role, especially on beefy creatures. A 3/5 with Vigilance can rumble. It can get in there on attacks and you know, it just sits back and brick walls everything too. Also, Vigilance seems like a good ability for mutate, because you are often going to be mutating big creatures on top of other Vigilant creatures, and Vigilance is nice to have on really big creatures. It's just not super relevant on small creatures. Now, this might make up for that, because it says creatures you control with Vigilance have 1 tap target creature. So all of your Vigilant creatures become tappers, and tap-in is a very good ability to have on Vigilance creatures, because it means you still get to attack with your creature and then hold it back on defense to tap creatures down on your opponent's turn. So they get to serve double duty of attacking while also still holding back blockers. Kind of as Vigilance does, but also just like prevents your opponent from attacking in the first place. Tappers, just as a pacifism effect, does any removal spell seem really good against Mutate. It means you get to kind of hold back your opponent's entire Mutate stack. Whatever, you know, monster they've created, Tapper is going to help take care of that. And all while you are attacking with those Vigilant creatures as well. Similar to the Flash creature, the blue-black Flash creature, I don't know if green-white is the quote-unquote Vigilance deck here. I have to go back and look, because I didn't expect this card. We already saw the red-black dinosaur that gave, you know, Menace, like, its own little thing. But it didn't seem like super strongly supported. We saw Menace creatures, but there wasn't that much else that really, you know, cared that you have Menace on board. It just happened to be a bunch of Menace stuff. This might be the same idea, where there are other creatures in green and white that have Vigilance, but this is really the only card that cares about it. So I don't know if green-white Vigilance is going to be an archetype or something like that, but this card is very powerful. Even if you have no other creatures in your deck that have Vigilance, this card is powerful, just for the stat line and the fact that it gives itself the tap ability as well, right? You know, 4 mana, 3/5, Vigilance, attacker, blocker, and tapper all in one is a really powerful card. And this is somewhat splashable, right? I don't know how often we're going to be splashing, but anything that's a gold card in green deserves a second look, because, you know, green is going to be the color of Mana Fixin'. So let's just double check real quick that we didn't get 15 billion new spoilers. We did not. But that's going to go ahead and cover it. You know, a few less cards, but a lot of archetypal specific cards here. Again, I want to go back and look at the color pairs when I'm done looking at the entire set and see if, you know, that is what these sets are, or what these color pairs are. It's pretty easy for, like, the Cyclone deck cards to see, you know, oh, blue-red, blue-white, red-white. Oh, those are all Cyclone decks, obviously, because, you know, that's the Jeskai pair. But Abzan was, you know, the counters matters sub-theme or something like that. Or like Mardu. Mardu is the humans matters sub-theme, but it seems like it's only in black and white. I don't know. I'm kind of using the commander decks as a baseline here, but maybe I shouldn't be doing that. Anyway, that's going to go ahead and do it for our Ikoria spoilers. Stay tuned. We'll have a separate video for commander spoilers. That one should be pretty short, because there aren't too many new cards to talk about, but the cards we are going to talk about are pretty crazy. So, again, stay tuned for that video. Once more, if you feel like, you know, if you're sitting here and you're like an hour into this video and you're still listening to me, do me a favor and just hit the subscribe button. You know, if you stayed this long, I would appreciate, you know, the support. You feel free to leave a comment below. Thanks to anyone who commented. I had a couple people say that this was good to listen to, just kind of as a sidebar thing, and that's kind of what I'm aiming for, is you can just put this in the background while you're doing something else, and you know, it's at least minorly entertaining for me to talk about stuff, if not actually informative. So feel free to drop your appreciation in any way, shape, or form, and find us on Twitter, MTG_Manarocks. That's going to go ahead and do it for this one. We've got probably just a couple more days of spoilers ahead of us. We're getting into a lot of commons and stuff like that. And remember, my name's Timothy with Manarocks. I'll see you all next time.